All right. Thank you everyone for joining. We are really excited. This must be like the seventh or eighth edition of our PPB report. You guys can all see my screen, right?
We can see it.
Perfect. The performance benchmark report, the Podscribe performance benchmark report, podcast performance benchmarks, whatever you want to call it. It is really now the only industry benchmark report right now that goes out every quarter to provide insights and trends around podcast advertising, streaming and audio. Again, insights and data. You guys notice we're doing things a little bit differently this time. We're starting off with a webinar. Usually we just send these out static. The biggest thing is we always get feedback. We always get, hey, can you explain this a little bit more? Can you add table of contents, things like that? And we've always updated them and sent them back out retroactively. But we wanted to try and see what it would look like if we kicked off and released this report via a webinar first so that we could hear people's thoughts, get those questions answered in real time. And then before we send this out to the masses, be able to address those things in real time. We're excited to have you guys all here. Like you saw in the email and things, the actual report won't be released till next week, so you will be the first to see this and all of that great stuff. Before we dive in, one last thing. We've been doing this every time now, but it's important to note we're not going to do a Q&A section at the end. That sort of defeats the whole purpose of making this a little bit collaborative. If you guys, anybody has questions, there is a chat. Drop your question in the chat. There's a raise your hand button. Raise your hand. We want these questions and these comments and things to really be live and dynamics. Don't hesitate. We'll have people reviewing the chat as questions come up, but there will not be a Q&A section at the end. So please, if you have a question, if you're confused on something, most likely there are multiple people who are also confused. And so help us get these questions answered and dive in. All right, without further ado, we are part of the Podscribe team. We have our CEO and founder, Pete, head of partnerships, Matt. I am Amelia. And then we're excited to welcome, some of you and most of you probably know, but Cam, who is a newish member of our team. He's a senior director of partnerships. He's a measurement and an attribution legend, just like Matt and the rest of the team. And we thought what a great way to welcome him onto the team by having him read through some of this awesome data and these benchmarks. So welcome, Cam.
Woo, welcome, Cam.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, like we said, kicking it off Q4 2024. To note, as always with the benchmarks reports, this is a rolling 12-month time frame. There's not enough data really to get within 3 months, not enough changes or 4 months. This is looking at the last 12 months and including Q4 2024. We have about 64,000+ podcast campaigns included, 240+ advertisers, and 20 billion impressions of data that we're using to populate this report. Like billion, 20 billion.
That's with a B.
Big number. All right, Pete, why don't you kick it off? We introduced a lot of new things into this report. We're going to be sharing some stuff that we include on every quarter just to show. But yeah, give us the high level takeaways, what we can expect, and what are some of the exciting things that we launched for this one.
Sure. Appreciate everybody coming. Super excited to do this live with the sneak preview here ahead of time. So just like one quick thing on this report is we tried for this one to add in as many new things as we could. We keep as many of the same takeaways. Some things such as which placement works the best, or how does episodic compare to impression and impression-based buys. Some of those things are the same each time, so we do keep them in here, but we try to focus a bit more on new.
Do you hear
I think
background?
Hi, everybody. Can you make sure that you mute yourself just so we can keep the presentation moving? Thank you very much.
I think just we try in this one to focus as much as we can on the new takeaways, but we still do include a lot of the old conclusions. So let us know after the report what you think, if we should continue doing what we're doing or how we should modify it. So in any case, excited here to share a couple key takeaways. I won't go too much into them because I don't want to steal Matt and Cam's thunder later, but we tried to answer a couple key questions. So one question we try to address is, how do run-of network buys compare to direct show buys? The takeaway is their impressions they're not quite as efficient per impression, but they do seem to be pretty comparable per dollar cost per average. So they definitely seem like a viable tool in your toolkit to not write off at all. So that's one thing. Another question we get asked a lot, particularly for new advertisers, is, okay, I can do the promos, but if I do pixel-based attribution, how many more conversions can I expect? So we took a sample of all of our advertisers and we found it's roughly 5. We have a bit more data on that, but roughly 5. Another question is, big shows or small shows? Do we want to try to buy the Crime Junkies, Call Her Daddies, or do we want to try to buy a bunch of the smaller shows? And I would say more data is always helpful, but what we're starting to see is that the smaller podcasts are seeming to edge out the biggest ones in efficiency, both per impression and per dollar. The middle is a toss up you'll see in the data, but small shows do seem to be pretty promising. Of course, it's a bit more logistically challenging to spread your spend there, but that's what we're seeing. Another point is simulcast growth. So much to probably nobody's surprise, simulcasts are growing. The number of podcasts that are thinking, hey, we should be posting on both to our RSS feed and to YouTube, that's growing. So there's that. And then we recently released our lag report because people were curious, how long is it taking for my conversions to come in after an ad goes live? We can show you the full chart and more data, but one number we're seeing is roughly 40% of engagement in terms of visitors come within the first week when using a 30-day conversion window. And last but not least, so this one might be the most important one, but I think we've talked about it a bit in the past, but we wanted to bring it up again, just a state of the industry. But what we're seeing is that still most leading ad servers don't support IPv6, despite most advertisers sending it. So this sets up quite a mismatch that we can cover more.
Awesome. All right, so let's quickly run through some fast figures. These are more just high-level insights, again, of what changed. I don't know, Pete, if there's anything notable here. I think these are more helpful for referencing what your podcast performance looks like and seeing it compared to benchmark.
Yeah, I was seeing if Bob, oh yeah, small, medium. Okay, yeah, we'll get to that. All right, seeing your question on what the sizes are. Fast figures, we won't dwell on these too much. I think these are just a good rule of thumb. It, of course, does really depend on the industry and show genre. You can get a rough benchmark for a lot of these here. Just picking one out, visitor rate. So what does that really mean? It means what percent of impressions then will lead to an attributed site visitor, and 0.21%. So if you have 1,000 impressions, just to put it into perspective, that's about two site visitors per 1,000 impressions. Maybe that seems high to you, maybe low. That's what the median is that we find across all of our advertisers. And with an average CPA of about $25, it comes out to about $12 per visitor. So yeah, we have the average conversion rate. You can do that same math. Attributed visitor purchase rate, it's about where it usually is. Usually it's around 5 to 6%. One thing that's, I think, consistently worth pointing out for this is that this is what percent of visitors that go to an advertiser's website end up purchasing. So if you're into Google Analytics and optimizing your site, you might think that's like a pretty high conversion rate for our website. And usually what we see in here is that podcast visitors do come in with a lot of intent. And so usually that rate is considerably higher than what an average website conversion rate might be. So I think that's just one thing to always keep in mind when looking at podcast visitors. So
Great.
Yeah, ad length, longer, better, smart promos. Most of you probably that won't be too relevant for, but it's there for those who it is. Simulcast, we'll get to that. CPA is definitely interesting. We try to put as much cost data into this as possible. So there's most of our data points here of cost. Okay, we updated the reach curve too. So we also I think we made it a bit more realistic based on feedback. And so to reach roughly 75% of the US monthly podcast listeners, we estimate it would take about 500 million impressions per month. All right, that's probably good on that one.
Yeah, so let's run through some YouTube simulcast snapshot stuff. Again, you can walk through this, but yeah, Pete, anything notable here?
Simulcasts are growing. I think people are heeding the advice that seems to be out there a lot of post your content everywhere. Wide, if you can, get it out there on your YouTube channel. I think more and more shows are seeing that. So we could actually probably just jump to the graph on the next chart. So what you're seeing first, if you take a look at the yellow line, so we took a look at all the campaigns in this past year, like 60, 70,000. And we looked at the ones that were episodic buys. And then we say, what percent of those per month are a simulcast? So what percent of these episodic buys each month have a video component as well as audio? So we start off, I think, as like high 40s, and towards the end we get up to about 60%. And the numbers are the months in 2024. So it does seem to be growing fairly steadily. I think it'll be interesting to see in 2025 what happens. The blue line, it's a little hard to tell what's going on there, and nothing really is the point. That what it shows is that for our simulcast campaigns, what percent of them are on YouTube views and what percent are podcast downloads, and it hovers around 2/3 YouTube like the whole year, which is interesting. So for the podcast, it's saying that have been a simulcast the whole year, they've roughly remained about constant, about 2/3 YouTube consumption. So more shows are going to the YouTube, posting on YouTube and other channels, but once they do, it doesn't seem like from this that YouTube is eating away substantially at shows that are already on posting to YouTube once they've begun posting to YouTube. Does Adam have a question?
No, I just dropped in some stats. Yeah, he was saying
Okay.
PPM, that would mean spending about 10 million a month, which is interesting to be able to quantify that and what that would look like. All right, let's move on. Pete, we're going to introduce another new one, performance by show size. So yeah, for all the people that dropped their questions in there, we'll dive into that right now. But yeah, Pete, maybe walk us through. We've got two main stats here, what that visitor rate looks like, and then what the actual cost per impression and conversion looks like.
All right, we can get to your question here on what is the size of the shows that we're talking about. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this chat thing. So how we quantified the show size is based on audio reach per month. So we bucketed them into 5 tiers. So 0 to 250K audio listeners per month, 250 to 500, and so on, and then 1 million plus, to just bucket shows together and see across all the campaigns in those shows what was going on with performance. So your first reaction to this graph might be like, it's a weird like bump in the middle, is like 500 to 750K the sweet spot. Honestly, maybe I think we need a bit more data. I think the main thing we took from this is that if you see the 2 dots on the left, the 2 smaller shows, or the 2 smaller buckets, but both those are considerably higher than the 2 buckets on the right. The middle, maybe I think we need more data, honestly, and more time. But if we take that out, we look at just the smallest and just the biggest shows, we see on a per impression level, smaller podcasts consistently are more efficient at driving visitors per impression. So if you jump to the next slide, we throw cost in as well. It's basically a flipped graph. It's a CPA where lower is better. Again, we see pretty much the same thing, where the 2 smaller tiers handedly are ahead, beat the 2 biggest tiers. The middle, again, I think we're like scratching our head a little bit on that one. I think we want to see more data, but you might ask, why would we think this is? And your guess is probably as good as ours, if not better. But one thought we have is that big shows, because they're more likely to just get shared or be in the Apple top 200, or they likely have more transient listeners that pop in and out. They're not quite as committed, where smaller shows, they may have more committed niche audiences that are more connected to the host, but there's not a bunch of people randomly coming in and out of them for one episode. That's our guess. Your thoughts are we'd love to hear them as well, but it is interesting to us that we do think smaller shows, if you can, organizationally or find a way to buy them to achieve the scale you need, we think there is the benefits there. But of course, buying a bunch of them obviously comes with more costs too, and more overheads. Maybe that's what the market is priced in, and the difference is the difficulty in buying more of those small shows.
Yeah. Ari and Bob, does that answer your guys' questions, or anything else there on the performance by show size? Let's see what we got. Yes, great. Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, let's move over to the IPv measurement gap, Pete. We've definitely talked about this one before from a recent update that we made a couple months ago. And so I think now for the first time, we're actually going to quantify like what not only the impact could be, but how widespread this potential issue is. And it really comes down to these IPs transitioning and what that can cause in terms of measurement and potentially unattributable conversions. So Pete, maybe give us like a high level of just, again, set the stage, what is happening, what is this problem, and then let's dive into how we can quantify how big this issue is.
So I'll try to not use too much jargon or anything. So essentially, there's just a couple key things that I think are important here. So probably everybody's Wi-Fi that they're on right now, probably most of us, we have both an IPv4 and an IPv6 address. Depending, some sites will use their IPv6 address, some are IPv4. So most of us probably have each of those. That's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing is that there's no way to convert between them. So if I see Amelia's IPv4 is 1234, there's not like some formula where it changes the 1 to an E to magically convert. There's no mapping between them. Those two things are important. So say if Amelia goes to podscribe.com and uses her IPv4 address today, but then goes back tomorrow, and for whatever reason, her Wi-Fi uses her IPv6 address tomorrow, that to us would look like two different people, because we'd see basically just two different IP addresses. They exist. People are transitioning to IPv6 generally out there, but for a variety of reasons, it's slow and there are some slight issues with it. So I'd say those are probably two big things to keep in mind, that most people have both and there's no translation between them and they look like two different ones. I think we could probably go to the next.
Because
slide.
what is that effect?
Okay.
You mentioned again, if I go on one IP to Podscribe and make a purchase, and then I go into another IP and make a purchase, any measurement provider is going to theoretically say that's two conversions when it's actually one, or they're going to say that conversion is not linked. What needs to happen?
Yeah, there are the website. In theory, we would probably put a cookie and probably know it was the same person. But if there only was IP addresses, then there wouldn't really be a way to tell. So, extending that analogy, I'll get to the solution. But essentially, where the situation podcasting is at now is most of the major podcasting ad servers, I think 4 of the top 5, only send the IPv4 addresses to us for dynamic buys. So we're only seeing Amelia's IPv4 address. But most advertisers that we work with, their websites will send us at the IPv6 address. So we have this weird mismatch where the publishers send the IPv4, the advertisers send a lot of IPv6, and there isn't a way to translate between them. So it's not necessarily like saying, oh, these publishers should upgrade. It's honestly, they can do whatever, but it's just there's a mismatch. And so the key point is that I think earlier, it was last year, I think maybe even a year and a half ago, we released an update where the solution was on our end. It was that our web tag would actually collect the IPv4 and the IPv6 address for every visitor. So then no matter what the publisher sends us, we can match both. So I think this is the key point, is that there's this big mismatch in podcasting, and that if it's not being accounted for in measurement, there's likely pretty significant missed amount of conversions that are happening. So there's more in like the Podscribe. We can link to it afterwards, but we just thought it was interesting that most advertisers do send IPv6, but most of the leading ad servers don't, setting up this peculiar mismatch that's like very important to address. So
Awesome. Any questions before we move on to the lag report? Cool. All right, Cam, let's chat about another new sort of feature that was recently introduced into Podscribe and now is making its way into the report, the lag report. What is it? How does it work? What does it tell you? And what did we find?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, hello, everybody. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm super excited to be a part of the Podscribe team and to deliver some of these awesome benchmarks and insights. I'm excited to introduce the lag report. This is a powerful tool that helps marketers understand how quickly listeners take action after hearing an ad. Some ads drive more immediate engagement, while others may lead to delayed conversions. And our partners have always had access to some of this data through our individual conversion reporting. But you may have seen that recent announcement a few weeks back on how we enhance that ability to quickly utilize this data and understand and tailor attribution windows to those specific goals. So the lag report breaks down response time so you can see which channels, which publishers, which shows deliver results faster. So not only does this help you measure campaign performance in real time, but it also allows you to forecast and project total results before the campaigns conclude. And with these insights, you can adjust those strategies on the fly, optimizing for quicker engagement and optimizing towards ROI. So this graph goes into more detail across all industries to showcase how quickly listeners take action and visit the brand's website after hearing an ad. So 16.7% of visits happen within the first 24 hours, but engagement continues over time. As Pete mentioned, 40% of those attributable visits occur in the first 7 days of the first week, and 80% of attributable visits occur within 23 days. So while we continually benchmark lag data for visits, it's a little bit more complex to have a universal benchmark for conversions, just giving the variety of brands, industries, products, call to actions, et cetera. So that's a little bit more complex. We are working towards a more industry-specific lag report and benchmark, but in the meantime, just wanted to call out that advertisers can use our adjustable attribution windows from 1 to 60 days to see what's working for their business goals.
Awesome. Promo code multiplier, Cam. This one's really big. Yeah, this is a big deal. I'll let you just dive into it. We get this question all the time, right? What is the percentage that I'm missing from just using promo codes? How does Pixels help? Yeah, what did we find?
Yeah, no, it's awesome to finally have an answer to this age-old question of how many more conversions would I see if I was including pixel-based attribution? Pixels capture 5 times more podcast conversions than promo codes and vanity URLs alone. So without pixel-based attribution, advertisers could be missing up to 85% of actual engagements or conversions. And that's because listeners don't always convert immediately. They may hear an ad, search for the brand later, or purchase through another channel like paid search, which then takes the credit. So you can see that pixel-based attribution helps fill the glass for a fuller picture of performance. And promo codes and URLs only capture about 15% of attribution, significantly underreporting the true ROI of podcast advertising. And on top of that, there are services like Retail Me Not or Honey that scrape the internet for promo codes. So it makes it really hard to have a clean read and for brands to track the true impact of podcasts if they're solely relying on promo codes. So also to ensure the accuracy of the data that we're representing here, we did remove any campaigns that had appearances of leaked promo codes just to have a more accurate read on that performance. But yeah, just wrap it up, pixel-based attribution gives advertisers that full picture, preventing loss, attributions, and misallocated budget.
That's just such a crazy number. Like whether you was really stuck on using promo codes and vanity URLs, here's the new multiplier that you should actually be applying. I think the bigger takeaway, and whether it's you use Podscribe or a different attribution provider, is it's a lot of misconversions. How are you going to be able to make the correct media buying decisions and performance decisions without that data? Awesome. Any questions there? Heidi Howe versus Pixel. Jeff Williams, Heidi Howe versus Pixel. That's a great question. Pete, we didn't include how did you hear about a service in this? It was just promo codes and vanity URLs, correct?
Correct. I think maybe by next quarter, we might have enough for the Heidi Howe because we have a fairing integration where we've been pulling that in for a number of brands. But we should add that. That would be a great compliment for next quarter, probably.
Okay, so just to confirm right now, just promo codes and vanity URLs. Let's see. There's some other questions here. Is this median or average? Median, great. Are these stats reflective of pixels and codes separately? No, this is the 15% promo codes and vanity URLs, and then the rest 85% is just pixel results. Sherry, does that answer your question? Sorry.
I think I was just curious if you combine them both, because I would imagine a lot of people would want to use both. What percentage does that increase? Is it just the obvious you pull them together, or do
That's a good
advertisers see something
question.
different?
That's a good question. We didn't combine them. We just looked at them separately here. For what percent overlap did that like 15-20% have to the total? That would also be probably pretty good to have in the next one too. So for this, at least they're totally separate. We didn't take the promos and then add them to the pixels here, but it would be good to know the overlap or between them both.
Good question.
Awesome. And we don't recommend using one or the other. We recommend using both, and even all three, including Heidi How To. So it's really just about making sure that you have all those solutions in place to be able to capture as many conversions as possible, just given the sort of hard to measure nature of podcasting. Pete, Cam, and Matt, Colin had a question about how this could be compared to Last Click.
Yeah, that wasn't included in this analysis, right? I think that there's some hypotheses that we can draw based on referrer URLs that we see, like what share of conversions are coming in from things like Google search. And we see a fairly significant number of conversions that come in with Google search as the referrer. Anecdotally, I've seen anywhere from like the 20 to 50% range when I've been analyzing data. But I don't know, Peter, Cam, if you had other thoughts on that. Perfect. I think we should do a more formalized analysis, though. That's a really good question and something we should add for the next version.
Would be counted close to asking. Got it. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next section. Cam, once again, another interesting set of data that we're bringing into this report. What does performance look like when we compare run of network buys versus single show buys? We'll look at visitor rate, purchase rate, and even CPA. Yeah, Cam, why don't you walk us through what these results showed?
Absolutely. Yeah, the next couple of set of metrics, you'll see a common theme where we're comparing the visitation and conversion rates, and then also reviewing the performance through the lens of a cost per dollar perspective. So with that in mind, let's dive in. Single show campaigns consistently outperform run of network buys when it comes to visitor and conversion rates. A single show campaign places an ad in a specific episode of a podcast, while run of network buy distributes ads dynamically across multiple shows or episodes within a network. And as the data shows, that single show campaign drives a 30% higher visitation rate and even greater impact for conversions, 1.85 times the purchase rate of run of network buys. And this suggests that the ad placed within a dedicated show creates a stronger connection with listeners, leading to a higher engagement and more conversions. But based on this, you might think that this is the clear winner. We don't need any additional data to validate that we're going to do single shows. But from a cost perspective, the higher visitor and conversion rates really shifts to a different story through the lens of the cost per acquisition. We see run of network campaigns are actually only about 8% more efficient on a cost per dollar basis, with $103 cost per acquisition for run of network and $112 for single shows. So this does make run of network buys a very attractive option, especially for new advertisers that are trying to test across multiple shows and find the best fit. For established brands, right? Run a network can still drive incremental reach within a publisher's audience, but both buy types really have their place, with run of network offering more efficiency and scale, while single show placements drive that deeper audience connection and intent.
Awesome. Any questions there? Cool. All right, let's move on to the next one, Cam. Same sort of thing, episodic versus impression-based campaigns. This one we do include every quarter, so we don't have to touch on this too much. But again, interesting results to see the performance across both, and then what it looks like from a cost perspective.
Yep, absolutely. As you mentioned, this is a sort of staple of previous PPPs. That trend is continuing, where episodic buys continue to drive stronger conversion rates than impression-based buys. So that holds consistent. Looking at the data, episodic buys deliver 1.52 times higher visitation rates, 1.44 higher purchase rates. From a cost per acquisition standpoint, we're seeing that episodic buys are 10% more efficient, with a $95 cost per acquisition compared to $100 for impression-based buys.
So again, pretty comparable. I think that for both run of network and single show, and then episodic and impression based, there's reasons why you'd want to do one or the other, and probably both, because they both can bring different results. But I think the interesting thing here, again, just to hit on your point, Cam, is that despite how these might look aggressive in terms of the performance over another, when we actually look at that cost per cost basis, it's not crazy. All right, read type, same sort of thing. Again, included in last quarters, things like that. But yeah, anything notable here, Cam, that was interesting this quarter?
Yeah, similar theme, updated metrics where host reads continue to drive stronger conversion and visitation rates. Looking at the data, host reads drive 1.3 times more purchases than impression, higher visitation rates. And the next slide, from a cost per acquisition standpoint, understandably, there's going to be higher CPMs for those host read ads, and advertisers are paying for the sort of premium for the added authenticity and engagement of a host read, which balances out that stronger performance. So that means while host read ads may drive more conversions per impression, they don't necessarily lower those acquisition costs compared to producer read ads. And there's certainly a balance to be struck depending on those goals of whether we're trying to go for more reach and efficiency or that deeper audience connection and engagement.
Great. Go to Jeff's question real quickly. Host read versus host endorsed. Pete, Matt, I believe it's anything read by the host versus anything not read by the host. Yeah, great. Great point, though, because even something being read by the host, it can come with a personal endorsement or not. In Podscribe, and so Jeff, you probably have access to this, but in the campaigns or the air checks tab, we actually give like a score, and we train a model of ChatGPT to score that host read ad read, and you can get some interesting insights there when it comes to looking at performance alongside that host endorsed read. But definitely interesting, maybe something we could bring into one of the future reports. So thank you for that question. All right, placement type. Let's dive into that.
Placement type. I have the honor here of continuing to showcase some of the metrics and benchmarks that we pretty much report on almost every single quarter, but we're going to try and make it a little bit fun, at least. In terms of placement type, it's not a huge shakeup here compared to our previous benchmark reports. Generally, the takeaway is the earlier in the show, the better. For the first time this quarter, we're also overlaying cost per acquisition calculations on these placement benchmarks. And we can see similar pre and mid roll, how similar they are on a per dollar basis. And even from a performance perspective, relatively similar. Perhaps unsurprisingly, sorry, post-roll, the least effective placement is post-roll. And honestly, even at a deep discount, it still has to work really hard to catch up to the per dollar basis performance of pre and mid. Pre and mid earlier in the episode definitely reigns supreme. Switch on to ad length now. Same insight here, right? As the last quarter. The insight here is longer ad reads actually drive better performance, definitely on a per dollar basis. This is primarily because longer podcast ad reads correlate with baked in host read ads. And I think it's no surprise, right? Many planners and buyers think of baked in host read ads as the cream of the crop ad unit. And although some of our past slides show how things like run of network DAI campaigns can tout similar results, I think the real takeaway here is that like long ads give brands a chance to tell their story without alienating the results specifically in the podcast channel. I mean, how many other channels can really say that longer ads drive better results? Not many. So we think that the podcast channel is just a great place, especially for those brands that really want to tell their story. Perhaps they're brand new and they require a little bit more time to make sure that the brand story gets out there. So a great medium for that.
Awesome. We got a couple questions here, or one question. Any additional data on back-to-back mid-roll, seeing shows start to stack mid-rolls, data on that would be interesting.
Yeah, we can say very anecdotally that when we see ads that are stacked, and the flag for that within Podscribe means that an ad is in the third or later position of stacked ads. We definitely see that performance drops. We don't have a benchmark for it here, but I think it's fair to say that deeper in an ad, I guess we'll call it pod, the worse your performance will be for sure.
Yeah, and actually, Pete, to your point, in the last benchmark report, we actually did quantify that. How does having your ad 3 in the lineup impact performance? I think it was like 30 or 40%.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic.
It's a pretty big dip. Yeah, usually 1 and 2, definitely better. 3, clear dip. 4, falls off a cliff. It seems.
Tiffany, it's a good question though. What ad length affects that? And we could definitely overlay that on the next version. That's a really good question.
Awesome. All right, let's go to the reach curve, Matt. I know this one's exciting and we've got some updates here, but yeah, why don't you walk through what this is?
Yeah, every quarter we're going to be updating this. And the reason why is we're obviously getting new data. It is stabilizing this curve here. To Pete's point earlier, the more work that we do on this, the more that it looks like a reach curve that we see across some of the other channels. What I'll say here is a friendly reminder for any of the advertisers or agencies that are looking for reach data to aid in their planning. We're happy to work with you to provide the data behind this graph, just so that podcasts can be better represented within planning tools. All you got to do is reach out to us at, no pun intended, reach out to us at reach@podscribe.com. Now, we still see that the vast majority of advertisers are playing in that bottom left quadrant of the reach curve. And generally speaking, advertisers are only reaching at most 25% of the podcast audience ecosystem. That being said, advertisers looking to drive high reach in podcast media can reach upwards of 75% of the industry by running about 500 million impressions in a given month. To Adam's point, $20 CPM, that's about 10 million in a given month. One might argue they might get a slightly more efficient rate buying at that scale, but either way, it gives you a sense that the types of advertisers that would be looking for this type of scale. From our perspective, the types of advertisers looking for something like that, it might be the advertisers that would spend millions on a 30-second ad for the Super Bowl. And can I just say, on a personal note, just thinking back, I don't know, 10 years, correlating advertisers buying Super Bowl ads with advertisers buying in podcast ads, it's almost unthinkable. So it's just awesome to be able to see how far the industry has come in such a short period of time. Reach curve, I think, helps to make that possible.
Woohoo. Any questions? Great.
Nice.
Incrementality. This is probably my favorite, Matt. We've got some interesting stuff here. Channel level percentage, and we're even going to look at that lift percentage across the channel levels. Yeah, why don't you tell us what we found?
Yeah, I've got the fun job of trying to explain these results because I think on the surface, when you look at the difference in incrementality and you're like, ooh, podcasting circle is bigger, podcasting must be better. That's not necessarily what this means. So yes, again, we see podcast incrementality is higher, but it's important to note that doesn't necessarily mean that podcasts always outperform streaming. So let's boil it down a little bit. So first off, these percentages literally mean, or they answer, what share of attributed conversions are incremental. So if we play a little thought experiment, you could imagine a streaming campaign driving a higher number of conversions than podcasts for just some random campaign. When you apply these incremental percentages, the share of streaming impressions that are incremental would be less. So that could bring parity between the two channels if we think about it. Now, if you add in the idea of like CPMs and the per dollar basis, with streaming, generally speaking, being a bit less expensive, it's still possible for streaming to outperform podcasting through this lens. So all of that said, why is streaming consistently less incremental than podcasts? Our hypothesis here is that the podcast audience is just much harder to find in other channels. And we can demonstrate this general hypothesis in the next couple of slides. So Amelia, do you mind moving on? Perfect. So first of all, this graph will explain it really quickly. On the x-axis here, we have the buckets of a brand's unique site visitors per month. It's probably easy to make the hypothesis, which is as you go from left to right in this graph, you go from smaller brands to bigger brands. And what we see here as we go from left to right is that the incrementality starts to step down as we go from left to right. And the idea here, the theory, is that larger brands, as they get bigger at least, the more likely they are to have a more diversified channel mix. So as they add additional channels, you start to eat in a little bit on the podcast industry ecosystem, the audience, and your incrementality starts to slightly go down. Now, how does that compare to streaming? Let's dive in on that. So with streaming, first of all, we do see incrementality slightly lower for the smaller brands, but still fairly considerably high. But as brands get bigger and they diversify their marketing mix, the streaming audience is easier to find in those other channels. So it drives a larger decrease of incrementality as we go from the 0 to 1 million to the 1 to 5, and it stays relatively low. So again, what we think that this shows is the podcast channel, the audience in the podcast channel, much harder to find in other channels. Streaming audio is a bit easier to find in other channels. And that's what drives a lot of the disparity in incrementality there. So that's incrementality.
Any questions from anyone? Great. All right. Yeah, let's run through these, Matt. Advertiser industry benchmarks, and then we'll go through some show genre benchmarks. Again, these are ones that we included, and I believe in the last couple, and we'll continue to do this. But yeah, what were some of these movers and shakers? Were there any changes? What did we find?
Yeah, I gotta say, I drew the short end of the stick here because I get to talk about the advertiser industry benchmarks. But hey, listen, not the most sexy, but probably one of the most important data points within this benchmark report. When introducing this report to new advertisers, agencies, and publishers, the first question that we get asked almost every time, do we have industry breakouts? Boy, do we ever. So let's review them a little bit. So this quarter, we see a very similar trend as to the previous quarter. Top industries are media and entertainment, food delivery apps, retail, software, fashion delivery, or fashion retail, sorry. Generally, when comparing this report to the previous report's industry benchmarks, the order is the same. Not a lot of movement going on. The obvious question is, what's that giant yellow one on the left? Why does media and entertainment jump out so much more than the rest of these industries? And we believe the reason is that the target audience in many instances is already aware of and think positively of the advertiser. This is because the types of advertisers in this category are also podcast publishers.
Mhm.
So these ads are typically asking their listeners, who are already highly likely readers of the content, to read content, log on, perhaps subscribe to a premium subscription, something to that effect. So you've already got a primed audience for that specific industry, which is why we see such an outlier there.
Awesome.
So
And
that's
then
visitor rate. Yeah.
just to confirm, okay, visitor rate, right? So what we're showing here is basically the median visitor rates by these industries. So if I'm a brand and I sell toothbrushes, it would be helpful for me to look in here and at least get a sense of an idea of some number that I could compare to my actual podcast performance.
At least in terms of just generally trying to drive the first step of engagement.
Yep.
Yes. Visitor being the top of the funnel. Exactly.
Awesome. And a question that we get a lot, and I'm sure we'll include it in another one of the benchmark reports, is outside of just these advertiser industries, that actual average order value and average order cost would be another really great way to look at this data. What are those average visitor rates and purchase rates by the average cost of what that item is that these advertisers are selling? So in case we get a question about that, we are pulling that data, but yeah, visitor rates here. So let's go into purchase rates. Anything crazy again here, new?
Yeah. When looking at purchase rate benchmarks, retail, telecommunications, tobacco, marijuana advertisers, and government education, they all rise to the top. The biggest mover and shaker here is government and education. And the growth in the purchase rate is largely influenced by some of the new advertisers that we've categorized into this industry. Those advertisers they are a bit of a retail, but they're also very educationally focused. So for instance, a few of the advertisers sell things like STEM-based toys for kids. So we expect to see things like a growth in performance there during Q4 buying seasons, which is obviously something that we observed here because the government education performance in the previous benchmark was much farther on the right side of this graph last time. Maybe worthwhile perhaps addressing this in the next one. I don't know if it makes sense to put them in retail, but either way, that's why we see such moving and shaking for government education. And then next, looking at cost per acquisition or a per dollar basis in terms of the advertising industry here. What I'll say is that when comparing industries, we see government education, retail, the others that you see up top. There's one major industry, however, that was at the top of purchase rate, but is now near the bottom in terms of CPA. That's telecommunications. It makes sense to us. Telecommunication industries have some of the most fierce competition, and it's one of the only industries where consumers are a zero-sum game. We seldom consume media without hearing from at least one of these companies. And so there's a very clear effort in driving huge reach and frequency with their marketing. They have extremely aggressive acquisition offers, free phones, discounted rates, because new customers mean a stable customer for a year or two. Certainly is not a surprising benchmark here.
Awesome. All right, let's get into show genres.
Let's do it. So show genres, media buyers and planners booking podcast ads, they ask for these benchmarks. They use these for planning and forecasting purposes. This quarter, we see health and fitness, education, kids and family, religion and spirituality, and business. They drive the most efficient visitation on a per impression basis. Not much of a shakeup here, quarter to quarter, so we can probably move on. In terms of purchase rate, we still see health and fitness at the top. That being said, we also see business and music are starting to creep up these charts when comparing purchase rates from the previous benchmarks. To me, it means these audiences, they may be a bit harder to drive engagement when compared to like kids and family, or let's say religion and spirituality. The intent of business and music audiences seems to be greater than those industries. So if we look at things like the attributed visitor conversion rate, how many of those that visited went on to convert, we actually see that music and business drive higher rates than kids and family and religion and spirituality. So it's why we see them leapfrog up higher. And then in terms of looking at CPA, so most impressive part of these CPA rankings it's because like health and fitness is just parked on the far left of all of these here, right? They remain at the top. Health and fitness drives 10+% attributed visitor to purchase rates. They have the most effective CPA on a per dollar basis. The moral of the story of these charts, I think, aside from understanding where every single genre may help you perform, is that health and fitness should be a part of an advertiser's podcast pie right now. It just seems like they drive just incredible performance for their advertisers, and it'd be keen to see if that continues on as we go quarter by quarter. But anyway, that is genre benchmarks.
Awesome. And we got some questions, Matt. Does government encapsulate political commentary and news?
We don't have a lot of news. I would say less on the political commentary as well. Government seems to be more like government bodies. In some instances, there are things like PSA ads. And I would say, no, it's not political commentary and news. No.
Some size of these segments and unique listeners. Next question.
Great question. Jeff, we'll probably have to follow up with you on that one. Be very interesting to see that.
Awesome. Any other final questions? Any other thing Matt, Pete, Cam want to add before we dive into?
I think there was Tiffany's too earlier. I think were you asking about media and entertainment? Tiffany, can we label that as a promo?
So more of a smart promo rather than an ad. Yep.
It probably could be labeled that way. Sure. Definitely still an advertisement, though, if we think about it.
Great. Any others I'm missing? I don't think so. Cool. I was a little bit worried we were going to run up on time, but we've got a whole 7 minutes here. We'll just wrap up. A lot of you guys are using Podscribe. If you're not, you're interested in exploring pixel-based attribution, verification, having automated air checks, things like that, incrementality, all of that stuff that we had walked through. Please visit our site, request a demo. If you mention in the how did you hear about us section, because we got to capture that attribution, the benchmark report, we're happy to honor like 20% off for the first 3 months. But yeah, again, all of this important and critical data, the only way we can get this is through a measurement and attribution, whether it's incrementality and the growth of pixel-based attribution and just the overall usage of it. It really is what is going to continue to help drive this industry forward and bring more advertisers in. Let's see. There's some other things at the end. We don't have to go through those, but yeah, Pete, Cam, Matt, any sort of final thoughts? Thank you all for joining. Everybody stayed on. I know this was a lot of data and a lot of content. We will be sending over the final slides to all of you guys tomorrow. You'll be the first people to actually access it. We'll send over this recording as well. And then the rest of everybody is going to get it next week on Monday. So yeah, any final things?
I got one final thing.
Oh,
please, Pete. No, you go first. You go first.
No, all I was going to say is always keep us posted too we're always on the hunt for more questions to answer between now and the next one where our brains are working to figure out what should be in there. So any point you think you've got a question, what's the promo multiplier? Don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'll say, too, a really great place to reach out and talk to us about that might be at the conferences that we're going to be at over the next month and a half or so. It is conference season. Holy cow. We've got South by Podcast Movement Evolutions, a few others. If you're going to be at those, reach out. We'd love to connect, hear any of your feedback, and discuss opportunities for partnership. So I think that's probably the last thing that I'll throw out there.
Amazing. Cam, any final words? How was the first webinar?
I thought we crushed it. A lot of content jam-packed into an hour. Yeah, definitely looking forward to everyone's thoughts and feedback. Looking forward to working with you all. And if we're not already connected, let's link up on LinkedIn and I'll see you guys there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll stay here if there's any stragglers, but feel free to jump. Really appreciate your time. And again, look out for an email from us.
Thanks, everybody.